Hey everyone, welcome back to Fluent Vibe Podcast, the place where emotions, psychology, and self growth become honest late night conversations. I'm Ria, and tonight's episode is for every introvert who feels nervous speaking English around people.
Hey everyone, Ethan here. And honestly, this topic is deeply personal for millions of people silently struggling every day.
Because many introverts understand English perfectly inside their mind, but suddenly freeze during real conversations.
The heart races, thoughts disappear, words become stuck.
And later they replay the whole conversation again and again mentally.
Thinking, why couldn't I speak normally?
And honestly, that feeling hurts emotionally, especially when people assume you're unintelligent, shy, or awkward.
But the truth is much deeper psychologically. This is not only about English, this is about social anxiety.
And tonight we're going to talk honestly about how social anxiety silently affects introverts during English conversations.
No fake motivation, no just be confident advice. Real psychology, real emotions, real struggles.
So relax. Take one slow breath with us. And let's begin together.
First, let's understand what social anxiety actually feels like internally.
Many people think social anxiety is simply being shy.
Honestly, it's much more intense than normal shyness.
Social anxiety is constant fear of being judged negatively by others.
Fear of embarrassment, fear of awkwardness, fear of looking stupid socially.
And for introverts, those fears often become even stronger internally.
Because introverts naturally process social situations deeply.
They notice expressions, voice tones, pauses, reactions.
Even tiny awkward moments can feel emotionally huge internally.
Now imagine adding another language into that emotional pressure.
Suddenly, the brain is not only handling social anxiety, it's also handling English grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, and translation simultaneously.
That mental overload becomes exhausting psychologically.
Which is why many introverts say things like, I can understand English, but I can't speak confidently.
Which honestly, that frustration feels painful because internally they know they're capable.
But fear blocks expression completely sometimes.
One of the biggest reasons social anxiety makes English harder is self monitoring.
Socially anxious introverts constantly monitor themselves during conversations.
How do I sound? Did I pronounce that correctly? Do I look nervous?
Meanwhile, the conversation is still moving forward rapidly.
And that constant mental checking interrupts natural speaking flow,
The brain becomes trapped between communication and self judgment,
which creates hesitation.
which creates more anxiety emotionally.
One another important thing to remember is fear of silence.
Many introverts fear awkward pauses during English conversations,
So they panic internally while trying to reply quickly.
but anxiety blocks thinking speed naturally.
And suddenly, even simple words disappear temporarily.
Honestly, anxious brains sometimes forget vocabulary they already know perfectly.
Because the nervous system enters survival mode instead of learning mode,
The body thinks danger is happening socially.
even though the danger is only conversation.
That's why physical anxious symptoms happen too: fast heartbeat, sweaty hands, dry throat, shaking voice.
And introverts become hyper aware of those symptoms internally,
Then they worry people will notice the nervousness.
which creates even more anxiety.
It becomes a psychological cycle. Fear creates anxiety, anxiety affects speaking, speaking difficulties increase fear again.
Another important thing is childhood experiences.
Many socially anxious introverts experience criticism earlier in life.
Maybe teachers corrected them harshly publicly. Maybe classmates laughed before. Maybe family members mocked mistakes.
The brain remembers emotional embarrassment very strongly.
And later, the brain tries protecting itself from future humiliation.
That protection often becomes silence.
Another hidden issue is perfectionism.
Honestly, socially anxious introverts often want perfect English before speaking confidently.
Perfect grammar, perfect pronunciation, perfect sentences.
But conversations don't work perfectly in real life.
Even native speakers pause, forget words, and correct themselves constantly.
Seriously, all the time.
But anxious introverts hold themselves to impossible standards internally.
And impossible standards create emotional pressure.
That pressure slowly destroys speaking confidence psychologically.
Another reason social anxiety makes English harder is comparison.
Many introverts compare themselves constantly with fluent, confident speakers online.
And comparison creates discouragement emotionally.
Because social media mostly shows polished confidence, not nervous beginnings.
Every fluent speaker once struggled awkwardly too.
Probably very awkwardly, honestly.
Another important psychological detail is energy exhaustion. Social interaction drains introverts faster naturally.
And speaking another language drains even more mental energy.
The brain is multitasking constantly, thinking, translating, managing fear, reading reactions.
That becomes mentally exhausting after long conversations.
Which is why many introverts sometimes feel completely tired after social events.
Another painful experience for socially anxious introverts is replaying conversations mentally afterward.
They analyze every sentence later.
Why did I say that? That sounded awkward. I should have spoken better.
And honestly, that mental replay damages confidence emotionally over time.
But here's something important to remember. Most people are not analyzing your English as deeply as you are.
Everyone is usually too busy worrying about themselves, honestly.
Another hidden truth is this. Social anxiety often makes introverts underestimate their actual speaking ability.
Fear makes the brain focus only on mistakes instead of progress.
So even improving speakers still feel unsuccessful internally.
That's why emotional confidence matters as much as language skill itself.
Another important thing is you do not need to become extroverted to become fluent in English.
Fluency is not personality type. Fluency is comfort with expression.
Some fluent people are loud, others are calm and quiet.
Both are completely valid.
Actually, introverts often become deeply meaningful communicators later.
Because they observe carefully, listen deeply, and think before speaking.
That emotional depth becomes a strength eventually.
Another helpful thing socially anxious introverts can do is practicing in emotionally safe environments first.
One trusted friend, online voice chats, speaking alone, recording yourself.
Small, safe experiences slowly teach the brain that speaking English is survivable.
Not instantly, not magically, but gradually. Honestly, fluency is less about perfection and more about repeated exposure. And maybe introverts need to hear this more often. Your quiet personality is not a weakness.
The world does not only need loud voices, it also needs thoughtful voices, gentle voices, emotionally aware voices.
Voices that listen carefully before speaking.
And maybe that quiet depth is something beautiful after all.
So, if you're listening tonight while feeling insecure about your English because of social anxiety, please remember this carefully. You are not stupid, you are not broken, and you are definitely not incapable of fluency.
Your brain is simply trying to protect you emotionally.
And slowly, through patience, self-compassion, and practice, that fear can become confidence too.
One conversation at a time.
And honestly, your voice deserves to be heard too. Part about social anxiety. And maybe that's the saddest part about social anxiety sometimes. Not that introverts have nothing to say, but that they often have too much to say internally and no confidence to release it naturally.
And many introverts carry beautiful thoughts silently, deep emotions, creative ideas, honest feelings.
But fear creates emotional walls around expression.
And over time, silence starts feeling safer than vulnerability.
Especially in English conversations, because speaking another language already feels emotionally exposing.
And social anxiety magnifies that exposure internally.
Every small mistake feels bigger emotionally than it actually is.
Seriously, people are usually too busy thinking about themselves.
But anxious brains imagine worst-case scenarios automatically.
That's how anxiety protects itself psychologically.
Another hidden struggle is emotional loneliness during conversations,
Some introverts feel disconnected even while surrounded by people.
because internally, they're trapped inside fear instead of fully participating emotionally.
That feeling can become deeply exhausting over time.
And honestly, many socially anxious introverts secretly wish they could communicate more freely,
Not perfectly, just naturally.
without overthinking every word, without replaying conversations later, without panic during simple interactions.
But healing starts when introverts stop seeing themselves as bad communicators.
Because the problem is not lack of intelligence, the problem is emotional fear.
And fear can slowly change through repeated safe experiences.
That's why small speaking moments matter deeply psychologically. Ordering food, answering calls, short conversations.
Every small interaction teaches the brain something important. This situation is survivable.
And eventually, the nervous system becomes less reactive slowly.
Another powerful thing introverts need is self-compassion.
Because many socially anxious people are extremely harsh toward themselves internally.
One mistake becomes emotional proof of failure.
So, growth never looks perfect in real life.
Fluent speakers became fluent through mistakes too. Lots of mistakes, honestly.
Probably embarrassing mistakes too.
But they continued despite awkwardness.
And maybe that's what courage actually means psychologically. Not feeling fearless, but continuing despite fear.
Another important thing introverts must understand is this: being quiet is not failure.
The world constantly praises loudness, but calm people have power too.
Some people dominate rooms loudly. Others quietly change conversations through depth and honesty.
And honestly, meaningful communication often matters more than constant communication.
That's why introverts often create deep emotional connections once they feel emotionally safe,
Because they usually speak with intention emotionally.
not just to fill silence.
Another hidden truth is this: many introverts become surprisingly fluent later because they spend years observing language deeply first.
Yeah, they silently absorb patterns constantly.
Pronunciation patterns, conversation rhythms, voice emotions.
And eventually, all that quiet observation becomes natural fluency slowly.
So progress may feel slow emotionally, but slow growth is still growth.
And honestly, some journeys are meant to be quieter.
Another thing social anxiety steals from introverts is spontaneity. Instead of responding naturally, they mentally edit everything before speaking.
Which creates emotional exhaustion constantly.
But natural fluency grows when the brain stops fearing mistakes so intensely.
That's why emotionally safe environments matter so much psychologically.
People speak more freely when they feel accepted instead of judged.
And maybe many introverts never truly needed more confidence.
Maybe they simply needed less fear, less pressure, less comparison, less shame.
Because confidence naturally grows when fear slowly decreases.
Another deeply emotional thing about social anxiety is pretending everything feels okay externally.
While internally, the mind feels overwhelmed constantly.
Smiling outside, panicking inside,
That emotional exhaustion is real, honestly.
which is why socially anxious introverts often need quiet recovery time after interactions.
Not because they hate people, but because their nervous system becomes overloaded emotionally.
And honestly, understanding yourself psychologically is already healing.
Because self-awareness reduces self-hatred slowly.
You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?"
And start understanding, my brain is trying to protect me.
That shift changes everything psychologically.
Another important thing, your accent is not something to be ashamed of.
Your accent simply means you learned another language.
That's actually impressive.
And honestly, emotionally expressive communication matters more than perfect pronunciation anyway.
People remember feelings more than grammar.
Warmth matters. Honesty matters. Kindness matters.
And introverts often communicate those emotions deeply once they feel emotionally safe.
So, if you're listening tonight while feeling insecure about your English because of social anxiety, please remember this carefully. Your fear is understandable.
But your fear does not define your future.
One day, conversations will feel lighter. One day, your mind will stop overanalyzing every sentence.
One day, speaking English will feel emotionally natural instead of terrifying.
And honestly, that day will arrive more quietly than you expect.
Slowly, softly, one brave conversation at a time.
Because healing is not loud sometimes. Sometimes healing sounds like a quiet person finally speaking without fear.
And maybe that's one of the bravest things a person can do.
Thank you for spending this peaceful night with us. This was Fluent Vibe Podcast. I'm Ria.
And I'm Ethan.
Keep growing slowly, keep speaking bravely, and keep trusting your quiet voice.
Because your voice deserves to be heard too.